We got a few people here, and my name's Charlie Stott. I'm an architect here in San Francisco, my own small firm, and I'm also the co-chair of AIASF Committee on the Environment. And joining me today is Mark Kelly. He's my cohort and co-chair at the Committee on the Environment. He's also an associate principal at BAR Architects here in San Francisco, and director of their sustainability group at BAR. And we've also joined by Vaclav Hasik. He's a program manager with Building Transparency. They're the nonprofit behind the EC3 tool and Tally tools for building lifecycle assessment. He's also done a lot of great work around sustainability as a consultant and working on building certifications, energy modeling, greenhouse gas reporting. So we're all here to talk about the Common App, and I think Vaclav can speak to some of the more technical questions having to do with the Measure 6 and on electrical use and EUI, and on some of the carbon questions that might come up in the chat. So what we're going to do today is just run through this. I know you're all here because you're probably filling out the Common App as part of your application for the AIA Design Awards this year, and it's a integral part of the awards. Let's advance here. Just a little explanation here. It's included in this year's awards as an integral and required part of the AIASF Awards program in 2022. I think they've been doing it now for 3 years. This is the 3rd year. And the Common App requires applicants to provide information and brief narratives covering a variety of project design areas, including some simple performance metrics. But we like to emphasize that the simplicity part of it. If this isn't overwhelming, it shouldn't be overwhelming, and hopefully your questions today should clear up any concerns you have about that. The Common App is not solely focused on energy, as you know, the top 10 toolkit used to be when they had the COTE top 10. It includes other questions about a broad set of project performance criteria spanning the 10 measures from the AIA's framework for design excellence. And that framework is really the AIA's focus on what the design excellence is, how it's defined. It becomes, and there are 10 measures in that, and it really becomes an integral design metric that we're going to be reviewing as a technical group for when you send in your submissions, and then we share that with the design jury, who's going to be looking at this this information that we provide along with the aesthetics that you've provided in your beautiful projects, and we'll be assessing this in a more holistic way. The information provided by applicants is reviewed by us, and then we're a team of professionals made up mostly of architects and some engineers. Our review will result in project rankings and overall narrative descriptions of each project's design performance. And the intent of this effort is to provide the design jury with broad, holistic, and consistent project evaluations to assist in the awards selection process. These questions are designed to be simple yet meaningful, and we'll get to that here when we look at the Common App itself. The questions are all related around these 10 measures of the AIA's framework for design excellence. And each of the 10 categories includes online links that we'll talk about a little bit and show you, providing information on various design metrics requested and to assist you in the narrative responses for your submission. Other than energy, the questions really require no technical expertise as well.
Charlie, I was just going to jump in and say, for anyone who is less familiar with the framework for design excellence, I put a link in the chat for everybody to go to take a look at and get some more resources. So I think, and Charlie is about to talk about that a little bit more.
Right. So the framework is, I think, is the reason we're sharing this information is hopefully so you can use it in future projects, or you perhaps hopefully used it on the projects you're submitting. The framework is a really good tool to approach your design projects from day one all the way through to post-construction. And it gives a good kind of rounded way of assessing a project's performance, because design awards are great if they're given as a whole assessment of a project, not just an aesthetic assessment of a project. And the intent here is to understand the fact that there's craft and there's beauty and there's siting and all those things in a project, but there's also other metrics. There's occupant health, and there's a better understanding in a project on how it fits into the landscape and how it impacts the landscape. And then the energy use it has is one of those metrics as well. And as we're finding now with the climate crisis, carbon is becoming increasingly more critical. And we're all starting to struggle with how to balance that in our projects in terms of material use. So these are all things that the Framework for Design Excellence addresses. And when you go through the Common App, when you fill out the Common App form, which I'll jump into next, I think what you'll see is there's really no one strategy that we're trying to get you to understand better or to excel at better. It's the whole package. So let me just pull off of here, pull up the sky. So can everybody see the screen here okay? I'm just going to kind of run through the Common App and tell you a little bit more about the, as I was saying, it's not one design strategy, it's really 10 that we're trying to get an assessment of your project from, a self-assessment of your project when you submit. And what we're looking for is really an honest, clear, and brief description of your design process amongst these 10 categories. And it's important when you're providing narratives to please keep them brief. Sometimes you got cut and paste, and sometimes it's easy just to paste the whole thing in, but just be explicit about what you're trying to achieve for each of the narratives that are here.
So brief and meaningful. Yeah,
brief and meaningful. It's our motto here. And first off, I just want to say the Common App is just to broaden out the conversation. It's something that the AIA National has developed, and I think will be using. They're not using it on their national awards yet, but California has adopted it. Many states have adopted it, and many local jurisdictions have adopted it with some minor tweaks. So just so you know, if you're in California, you're doing California projects, our Common App is the same as AIACA's Common App. So that's a good thing. But just make sure that you're filling out the current Common App that the AIASF has provided you as part of your toolkit for doing the submission, because it's always a problem to get a Common App from 2 years ago that doesn't really match up with the ones we're looking at now. So just a quick run through, a high level run through. So the first part of the form you're going to be filling out is really just project information. It's your address and size, building use data, a few questions about the 2030 commitment, more for gaining better knowledge about how awards are linked with the AIA's 2030 commitment, less about, that's really not something that we're going to be ranking you on or anything like that. It's just good to know. And then we jump into the 10 measures. And so the 10 measures are this design for integration, which is really more all narrative based, and then it gets into equitable communities. The third one is design for ecosystems, and then the fourth is water. Fifth is economy. Sixth is energy, and this is where your EUI comes into play, and we'll talk a little bit more about the details there in terms of what EUI is and where you get it and need to put it in here. Well-being, yet another very kind of yes, no, and narrative-based response on that one. Design for resources is a broad-based one that actually touches on carbon, but isn't critical that you respond if you haven't done carbon accounting for your project, but it gives you some information that you'll find useful if you begin carbon accounting your projects now or in the future. The 9th and the 10th ones are design for change and design for discovery, which is really kind of post-occupancy questions about your project or past projects too that are related to the one you're working on now. And also really helpful in this is like scroll back up to the top, just so as you start entering information into the project database, this little live tool we call the spider web begins animating, and it's a quick review when you're done with this submission. It should come up looking sort of like a spider web that just shows the strengths and weaknesses, potential weaknesses and potential strengths of the project on these 10 categories. So it's kind of an interesting way for us to get a quick snapshot, sometimes accurately, sometimes inaccurately, of the project when we are going through to review it and when the design review folks look at it after we're done. So
one thing I'll jump in to say, Charlie, is the for everyone on the webinar is that even if I think one of the key things that we would like to emphasize when you're filling out the application is being sure to fill out all the responses and all the categories and and everything with the idea that they're not leaving it blank is not going to allow people to the reviewers to accurately assess what's been happening, and we'd prefer you to be open and honest about if it's something that's not been considered. That's fine. Just I think somebody's got their mic on.
Yes, somebody needs to mute.
If everybody can mute. So the key point being is even if something's not been considered, that's fine. You're not necessarily going to be penalized for it. It's just a question of being transparent and saying, no, this was not a key driver on this particular project, and so it wasn't. We did not do that. For instance, and it doesn't.
Right.
You're not going to be necessarily penalized, but it's going to significantly help both the technical reviewers and the jury understand that the context within which the project's been designed.
Great. So project information is your first, not related to, it's basic information, and this one's kind of a critical one to Mark's point of making sure you fill in all of this. You give your project name, location, size. I think is pretty self-explanatory. Building use. If it's a single family home, it's pretty straightforward. These are all drop-down menus that you can select from. And if it's a multi-use project, for like this example here, where it's maybe multifamily with a restaurant and retail, you can put in what relative square foot percentages of the project are each of those uses, and up to 3 options. So if you've got 4 or 5 uses in the building, just use the top 3 and make sure that the percentages total 100%. There are tools here on the right. There's on this right column all the way through the Common App. There are some tools here that are really helpful. Sometimes you need them, sometimes you don't. Sometimes they're just references, like the Zero tool for energy baselines. These are self-generated, so you don't actually need to go in and figure anything out. And they're self-generated based on your building use. But there's more information here just to make you more familiar with some of the topics that are being pulled up on the Common application. Floor area, cost data, which is not, I think the most important part of the cost data is actually your permit year. this one's super critical for a number of reasons because it triggers what code you fall under. So 2018, for example, has if you change this, it changes all the way through the calculations. For example, on the energy calculations, it changes the baseline for those energy calculations. So if you're 2018, for example, the 2030 commitment requirements are 70% above baseline. But if your project was actually permitted in 2020, and if it changed this to 2020, you can see down here that it goes to 80% because the 2030 baseline changes in 2020. So just make sure you get the year that's here. If you're uncomfortable putting the cost, and I can understand that, just you can leave that blank if you'd like. It just is helpful. It's less something that's going to be published, and it's more something that helps us understand what's the cost per square foot. And we know in California that can be very high, no matter what your project is, but it's all relative too. So it just gives us a sense of the sort of economy of each of the projects and how that played into the design. Use data, and then this is all here is number. You guys have to enter this on here. There's hours per week of operation and the typical occupancy and the number of people. So
And
that's
relatively important information to put in as accurately as possible. And obviously it's going to vary depending on the project type, but it will influence some of the kind of auto calculations later on in the application.
Right. And it also calculates this number down here. So
right.
And then this is one just that has a little bit of information on the AIA 2030, which is a great platform that I encourage everyone to sign up for. It's basically just kind of tracking all your projects for their energy use, and you can get your assistance from your mechanical engineer or your Title 24 folks to help do that every year. And there's just more information here on that, but you don't need to do any, you don't need to enter anything on that on this Common App. So then it jumps into the measures. Measure 1 is design for integration, and these are just descriptive narratives. And again, I think brevity is helpful here. Understanding what the project is about in this first one is great, and the client impact statement is also helpful, relating to how the project came to be and how that impacted or influenced how you design the project. And then I think the most important one, and maybe the one you really want to focus on, is the statement of design excellence. And it's what's the big idea, right? Is there a big idea here that brings together all the 10 measures of the Common App and that are asked about in the Common App? And you can describe that here. You know, you can talk about how beauty was important. You know, you wanted something that was set into its landscape in a way that was meaningful. At the same time, you were trying to reduce energy use and material use on the project in order to reduce the impacts on the environment. So it's this balance of I think soft information and hard information as part of the process that we want to hear about in the statement of design excellence.
And also, I was just going to add, I mean, it's kind of, you can think of it as the sort of the ethos of the project, but every project's not necessarily going to integrate all 10 measures, but it's key to be identifying which are the priority measures for the individual project as well.
And a good way to, if you're interested in how other projects have described their projects, there are links here for each one of these measures. First, there's actually design for integration. There's just a quick description of what this measure is trying to embrace. And then the link here is, and I'll just click on it. So it'll open up, takes you to the AIA. The AIA site for, this doesn't look right. Anyways, I will
Try
shut this out.
refreshing. Try refreshing the page.
Okay.
But I think yep, you're there.
There it goes. So this takes you to the AIA site, which isn't here. So I'm sorry, my technology is not working very well, but if you link on those, they're on your Common App. They will just give you a good sense for each of these. You know, there are other projects that have gotten AIA Top 10 awards, and they all have description. They're sort of great descriptors for each of these in terms of what they did that made it important, made this topic important for their project. So it helps you with some language too, in keeping, again, trying to keep the statements brief. For example, on measure 2 for equitable communities, what we're really trying to get across here, have you get across, is how your design solution affected more than just the client and current occupants. If you're multifamily housing, how was the neighborhood or the larger environment of the place you're doing your project impacted, and how did you from day one kind of try to understand that context in the design process? Because it's really about where did you start, what was important at the starting point, and how did that affect the project through the course of design and the outcomes of that design. Community engagement, you know, if you're a single family home, you probably don't have any community engagement, but that's okay. You know, we understand that. So I think these are ones where design for equitable communities might be much greater for a multifamily housing urban site than for a single family home in the suburbs or in the mountains. Justice and equity is an important aspect that we're trying to understand how each designer has thought about justice and equity in the design process. And we just want to hear more about that if you focus on that in your process. And then it gets to the typical transportation. You know, these are the old designed for community topics of transit and bike scores and walk scores. And again, there's information here for filling all those out. There's a link right on the right here for walk scores, which is actually everything. It's bike, walk, and transit scores. And an example here for if you are not in an urban area and you don't get a high score on this, what were your considerations? If you're a single family home, you know, do you have all electric vehicle charging at your place so that there's a better means of transportation than you have a gas guzzling car sort of thing. So, you know, be creative with how you respond on these narratives and briefly just tell us, you know, where you're focused. That's what's important. And then lastly is, again, the narrative. A lot of these include the narrative that's just overall, you know, what are your unique strategies for community outreach or alternative transportation strategies to decrease dependence on cars, that sort of thing. So, Mark, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say on the top first for measure 2 on the community engagement and justice and equity, as Charlie said, we understand that not every project, those are not the top priorities for every project. The example of a single family residence is what Charlie mentioned. So, but it's useful and to the technical reviewers as well as the design review committee, the jurors, pardon me, to at least put something in there. Just say this, you know, this was not a priority for this particular project, and you know, it could be as simple as that, rather than just leaving it blank. I think that's helpful for everyone who's reviewing in the review process.
So design for ecosystems, this is stepping outside the sort of human occupants or the human local nearby folks. You know, how does this affect the nearby environment? You know, was this a previously developed site where you're reusing what's there? Are there landscape strategies that were used, which really helped with a number of things, whether it's local habitat or water use, that sort of thing. Is the project bird friendly? These are all, when you click on these, they're all yes, no drop down menus. So they're pretty straightforward, pretty quick. And then a ecosystems narrative. Again, these are these prompts on the right. Answer some of these questions briefly and let us know how you focused your efforts on ecosystems. And then these are a couple of links on the right that have to do with bird-friendly design and the IDAs for lighting, dark sky standards for lighting, that sort of thing. Design for water. No real metrics here per se, but questions about conservation of water and how you approach that in your design. So, stormwater managed on site, is potable water used for irrigation, is potable water used for cooling. Again, these are really just yes, no responses, so pretty straightforward. And then a narrative that talks about any special efforts you made to conserve water and use water and reuse water on the project. Design for economy, good design adds value for owners, occupants, community, and planet, regardless of the project size and budget. So again, here's where like this 200 here, the square foot per occupant, that pops up based on the information that was entered in the first chunk of data entry. And this is trying to just give us a comparative sense, the reviewers a comparative sense of how many square feet per occupant your project is designed to. And then again, a narrative on strategies to right size the building. Sometimes we call this value engineering. Sometimes we just say we are doing the same size building, but we're doing it more efficiently with materials that are less cost, but and less carbon, for example. That's a design for economy as well. So, and also thinking about growth. The economy side is there room for phasing this in future projects, or are you going to be building does your client have anticipation for building the company within this building, and that's why it's the size it is. So a couple of narratives there. Design for energy, and this is where Vaclav could maybe elucidate a little bit. This is basically our kind of energy code input, and this is where you'll probably want to, unless you're an architect who has this skill, you'll want to talk to your Title 24 consultant, or better yet, if you've got an engineer who's been doing some modeling for your project, talk to them about this EUI, which is energy use intensity value, which is measured in kBTU per square foot per year. Basically, it's an energy value that, the lower it is, the better it is. And it's compared against a baseline, which came from, again, the values you put at the top for your building type and the date of your permit. If it was 2020, it's going to be a different set of values than if it was 2018, the benchmark values. So Vaclav, do you want to step in here and just talk about the struggles with trying to get this EUI value and make sure we don't make mistakes about the Title 24 value versus what we're looking for in this prompt here?
Yeah, sure. So I think you mentioned some of the basic important aspects of selecting the energy code that will pre-populate some of these benchmark EUI fields, such as on line 134. For the estimated EUI based on code. So this is something that you probably will work with your consultant on, with. And it can start with the Title 24 calculations, but there are additional steps that you need to take to arrive at basically the cumulative kilobtu per square foot per year. the typical tools such as Energy Pro or the CBECC software tools will probably give you a more detailed breakdown that what you need to enter into these fields. But you can go into the EUI from Title 24 link on the right side here. And Mark also dropped that in the chat box. There are some additional calculation steps and instructions on how to arrive at the EUI that's requested on this common app. It basically comes down to just converting electric kilowatt hours into the kilobtus, as well as the typical, natural gas energy values that come in therms usually in those tools, also into the common kilobtu per square foot value. The other thing about the design for energy, so you may have some on-site renewables. The EUI grows on line 139. That includes basically the site energy consumption of the building, and it doesn't matter which source of energy it's coming from. So it's just the total energy consumption of the building. You can enter the amount of the EUI that's offset by renewables on the next slide. So just keep that in mind as well, that those are sort of entered separately. And again, if you're using some of the existing tools such as Energy Pro or CBECC, you may have to, it's not as straightforward as just taking those numbers from those tools. You have to align it with the format of this sheet.
And just to back up a little, these benchmarks are generated. They're not something you enter. They're generated based on the information that you put in, the building type in the local energy code and the year that you were permitted. So it's really just these gray tabs here where you need to put some information in. So I'm sorry, I just wanted to make sure everyone understood that, Michael.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think that covers, I think the gist of this project. Again, gist of this measure. Again, at the end, we do ask for a rough, explanation of some of the measures or energy efficiency improvements that resulted in some of the improvements in the energy performance of the building.
And this question here about the 2030 challenge or commitment, how you want to call it, the AIA's 2030 commitment. This is also auto-generated if you were able to beat the benchmark by over, some percentage, 80%, 70%, 80%, depending on when you were permitted. This will tell you whether you meet that target or you miss that target. So again, just familiarizing you with the 2030 commitment is our intent here. And certainly if you beat it, that's a good thing. But if you miss it, that's not the end of the world. Especially if you were attempting to try to do something that was more energy efficient. I think there are three things here too, just to back up a little bit, that the ways of entering this. And one is if you didn't have an engineer involved at all, if you were single family residential and you did design build and your MEP guys were all design build, then you probably didn't have an engineer doing energy calcs through the design process. So you're going to have to rely on Title 24's information for the KTBU, which means you go back and talk to your Title 24 consultant or an engineer. If you did have an engineer who was running energy calcs through the process, they should very quickly be able to give you this actual EUI number. And just make sure if you go back to Title 24's EUI, that gets translated, as Vaclav was saying, because it's a time-dependent value that's used for Title 24, and that's not what we're looking for. The Title 24 is a state of California thing, and they're measuring their PG&Es or the utilities time use standards in terms of how they value energy rather than actual energy use. So, and then the final option is if you are trying to get a permit. If you're going after an award for a project that was permitted, 4 years ago and completed last year or 2 years ago, and you actually have energy data, actual energy data from the project, use that here as a KTPU number from your utility bill. That's kind of the best way to enter this, because it's the most real and the most accurate. Anything else on energy? I don't know, do we have any questions about energy while we're on this one? Mark, are we getting any questions yet? I don't know. Certainly people should pop stuff in if they've got questions on these topics.
Yeah, if people have questions, it might be you can either unmute yourself and ask, or put it into the chat, and we'll work it into the conversation.
And maybe what we'll do is we'll just get through all these, and then we'll do Q&A at the end. That might be it, because we're almost done here, just reviewing this. Design for well-being. You know, how does your design process you used support the well-being of the folks using it? And it includes physical, mental, and emotional effects on building occupants and the surrounding community. So it also does include, if you're in an urban area, you know, how are people, if they're occupying a public area, public part of your site, you know, what is that impact, positive impact? So, again, there's some specific questions here that are all drop down yes, no's about things like indoor air filter, whether you did filtration, the glazing strategies you used, potable water was treated, if you looked at a chemical concerns list during the design process, and then a narrative that just talks about how you approached occupant well-being during the process. Design for resources. This is about material use. This is kind of where carbon comes in, but it doesn't, you know, if you didn't do Vaclav's work is actually, he works at a place with that does the building transparency, does the EC3 and tally tools, which are their life cycle analysis tools, which help you understand how much carbon is embedded in your project from manufacturing all the way through construction and then the life of the building itself. So those are tools here that you can look at, but you don't need to enter that information unless you've done it already for your project. And then I would put it in your narrative and just talk about what tools you used when you were thinking about material selections.
Yeah, I will add. Sorry, Charlie, to jump in. I was just going to add that if you are already using some of these tools, that's great. If you haven't, that link on line 165 will take you to the AIA page. If you go into the resources tab, it actually lists some of the whole building lifecycle assessment tools that you can use for this purpose. I will say, if you are working in Revit, for example, if you're modeling in Revit, Tally is probably the best tool. If you are just using rough material quantity takeoffs, you can use the Athena impact estimator or the EC3 tool. Both of those tools are free to use. If you are not going as far as actually, quantifying some of these embodied carbon impacts, you can also just skip the first couple of rows here and really do more of a qualitative, description of how you have addressed some of these resource aspects of your project. So I think starting on line 170, you can start filling out, has recycled content been a criteria, and you can just, I think that's a yes or no question. Same with FSC wood, wood sourcing. There are additional questions about low carbon concrete, if you have even thought about that, or if you've worked with suppliers about getting low carbon mixes. And so, yeah, just answering some of these questions, yes or no, is a good start, just to get you thinking about these topics. Also, the impact the link that says high impact on the right side, I think it's line 174. That also has a nice article that actually goes over some of the basic strategies you can take to reduce the carbon footprint related to the construction materials. And so if you haven't addressed this on your current project, you can definitely use that for the, for your future projects, sort of as a guide.
And I think that the thing you can learn about from, if you took an approach where you actually renovated a building, you've already taken a huge step toward reducing your carbon footprint. If you haven't built new, if you haven't created a whole new structural system and you're reusing it, you've already kind of stopped that process of tearing something down and then rebuilding a whole new steel and concrete structure that starts a new carbon clock. So when you're responding to this, just think about your project that way. Even if you haven't gone through and done a deep dive into materials research with respect to carbon, I think you can talk about it in a way that says we're saving by simply containing existing or minimizing. If you keep the building smaller, it helps minimize the use of materials in total, which reduces your carbon impact. So.
The other alternative approach to that, just as another thing to think about, is in the utilization and selection of materials, a simpler palette using fewer materials is also a valid approach for reduction of resources. And using a polished concrete, floor finished where it's appropriate is instead of adding floor finish on top of that is a reduction strategy.
Point, Mark. Design for change is measure 9, and this is all about thinking about your building's adaptability over time, and what its life is as things change. It also talks about resilience. This is kind of a topic that says, are you in a fire zone or are you in an earthquake zone? I mean, we're all in earthquake zones if we're in California. So I'm assuming we're designing to that standard, but are you designing above and beyond that standard for life safety? Or in a fire zone, are you selecting your site based on the impacts of fire? Are you thinking about your design of your building with the impacts of fire or floods? Or all these other things that we need to worry about. So I think here again, there's some resilience questions here about, can your project remain useful for some period of time after a power outage? Can you work without utility power for a period of time? Has the design made accommodations for projected climatic change over the building's lifespan? And those are all things that you have to think about and talk about as in the design process early on. And if you've done that, we just love to hear about it in your narrative. So if you haven't so much, that's just be honest about that. Because we're all trying to figure out how to design for something 30 years in the future, and it's hard. And lastly, design for discovery, but not leastly, is sort of what have you learned from this project? Or perhaps what have you learned from prior projects that you brought to this project too? That can be a really helpful way of responding to this in the narrative to this measure. Did you do any if you're submitting this after the project's been done for a year or two, did you do any post occupancy surveys? And what did you find out about the functioning of the building? And was anything done to correct it or tweak it, or to take it to the next project that you've done better since? So that's the intent of this and this measure. And I think these are all pretty straightforward. Again, a lot of yes/no responses with narratives, and the technical ones are a little bit on resources with an LCA. If you actually did something with a carbon calculation, you enter it here, but if you haven't, you just leave that blank, because you don't know. And then back to measure 6 for energy, that's the other one where you probably would want to talk to your engineer unless you're skilled at figuring out how to get the EUI from Title 24. So I think that's it for us. And once it's all filled out, this thing turns into a wonderful looking spider that sometimes I can't figure out what it really means. But that's why I think your detail in the submission will be important for us technical reviewers to help the jury understand how well your project is performed in all these 10 measures.
It's a quick indicative kind of overview. Yeah.
So any
Do we have
questions from anyone for us? I think one thing, if no one has questions, if you want to return to this, I think we're going to have this conversation posted. The AIA is going to post this conversation on their website if you want to return to it. Mark, you might want to put in the chat the AIACA's similar one, which is
just added that. Yeah, just added that. And yeah, I was going to say that there's another webinar that AIA California did last year, and I believe it was last year, which is good as well. So we'd refer you to that. And again, as I say, it's in the chat, so you can grab that link from the chat, or go to the AIA California website, and you'll be able to find that there.
Yeah.
We have one question. We have one question from Julia. Some measures and narratives are a bit confusing for interiors because they seem to target new construction, like the design for ecosystems or water. How best to address this, or not applicable? I would say that if it is just an interiors project, that that it would be less applicable to ecosystems and water. They're not mutually exclusive necessarily, but if it was not a primary driver within the project, then I would suggest that that's the part of the response is that this is either not applicable because we weren't changing any fixtures or changing the plumbing system in the case of water, or in the case of the ecosystems, it was purely interiors and that had nothing to do. I mean, the only potential linkage with ecosystems and or water you could start to talk about material selections and how those material selections might relate to those things, if you've thought about that. But if not, then just I think, as we have tried to continue to say, the transparency of the intent and the objectives behind the project are very helpful for the reviewers and the jury.
And it's not, I think, Julia, to reiterate what Mark is saying, is if you're doing a TI project where you're not touching the bathrooms or something, or you don't have control over the mechanical systems,
right?
It's pretty clear to the reviewers. We understand that. That's kind of a oddity in the system. But if there's something you did that, in your material use that is exemplary, just talk about that in the narrative. Or you can state that, we had no control over the bathroom, so there was no water, or we didn't do a kitchen, so there was no water use change to the project. And so it just becomes it's kind of a neutral response to the question that is obvious when you dig deeper into it like you are.
Any additional questions?
Well, just so everybody also knows, one thing we're going to be doing is we've got a group of 10 or 12 reviewers who are going to review your submissions Common App, and we end up doing our own sort of ranking of them, based on what we've read and what we've seen in your submission relative to these 10 measures. And that we just synopsize and pass along to the design awards jury to help them better understand. We give them a little mini presentation to sort of help them understand what we've done and how they can use the information in their overall assessment of the project. that they're doing as design jurors. And I just saw, what did I just see? I just saw today the jury was announced. Maybe it was announced earlier, but I just saw it come up on the AI website. So it sounds like a great jury, and they do, you know, it's a combo of people who are both interested in a variety of design strategies and approaches. So I think they're going to really appreciate the kind of multiple layering of the Common App approach, looking at these 10 measures, and they're going to appreciate how, you know, where somebody's able to achieve all 10, you know, at a higher level, that just is, it puts them in a better place to recognize as being good design, not just exemplary technical technical performance on a project. So. And the other thing about this is this will be, the intent is this will be a national foundation for design awards within 5 to 10 years, where every AIA is going to be using this or some variation on the Common App. So, you know, Los Angeles has done sort of some slightly different stuff, but they're at least kind of moving the bar on trying to understand the top 10 measures and how they can apply to the design awards process. Any other questions or thoughts or comments? Let us know before we close down here.
And if you come up with additional questions afterward, feel free to reach out to us.
Yeah, maybe. Do you want to throw that on there? You want to throw our email addresses? How should we do that? I don't know. Carson's probably still on one too. He's the AIA.
If you go to the AIA San Francisco website and go to the Committee on the Environment, both of our emails are there, located there. That's probably the easiest. Julia, pardon me, has identified climate zone 3C missing at row 41, question mark, only A, B are available to choose. We'll take a look at that and see.
No problem. Well, what's the climate zone? I didn't look at the chat.
3C.
Is that, and where is that in California? Where is that? Must be somewhere in California. There's something close.
So Julia is saying, I think San Francisco's climate zone 3C.
Oh my gosh, well, that's a problem.
Yeah, that would be a slight problem. Yeah. Well, we can. I think we can check on this. We didn't build the spreadsheet, so but we can check with AIA San Francisco and figure this out.
You know, one thing I do, because I don't think we're going to figure it out before the potential submittal deadline, and it would mean sending something new out and everybody's got to redo their stuff, is Julia, this is probably something what we should do, or have Carson do, is send out an email saying, why don't we do that? We'll do a little backup, and we'll have you send something, we'll send something out to everyone who's submitting to let them know what zone to use that's closest to San Francisco. So it might be, I don't know what 3B or 3A is, but that's a good question. I know, that's surprising. This has never come up, especially if that's San Francisco. It's not like it's Modoc County or something where not many people are doing projects. So, any other questions?
I think if there are no other questions, we can wrap up, and thank you everyone for attending. And again, if you have any other comments or thoughts, feel free to reach out, and we will hopefully be reviewing your submittals soon.
Shortly. Right. Good luck. Thank you for attending today. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Yeah, thank you.